thank you all for coming, and I should just explain that Mike here is filming this so that it can go on YouTube, because obviously descendants of these men now live all over the world and they're not here, so making it available on YouTube means they'll be able to access it freely. So on the 1st of March 1917, HMS Pheasant, which was an M-class destroyer, went out on regular morning patrol from Scapa Flow and out into the west. It was going to go down the west coast and around into the North Sea area and everything. And this is what, we don't have a picture of HMS Pheasant because it was so new. I've not been able to find any images of it, but this is a model of HMS Opal, which also had a tragic ending off the coast of Orkney, with one survivor, William Sissons, who I've actually written about, and his family have sent me information about him, about his story as well. But so the M-class destroyers were basically all like that because it was a wartime project and they just produced, I think it was about 85 of them or something. But anyway, so it set sail with its crew of 89 and struck a mine off Rora Head at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So if you think that's what it looked like, and that's what it's like on the seabed floor, into bits, basically blown to bits, because it was also carrying like a load of dynamite and ammunition and everything anyway. So when it struck that mine, you know, there was no call for help or anything, it just whoosh. And that gives you a better aerial view of Lawrence's model there of what it would have looked like. So they were really fast, super duper vessels for what the purpose they were used for, which was these patrolling jobs in the North Sea and everything like that. They were greyhounds in the North Sea, I think they were called. So only one body was ever recovered, and he was actually pulled from the water still alive, because the explosion happened at about 6 o'clock in the morning and there was a delay, there was a mix-up in going out to any rescue, and by the time they got there, like over 2 hours later, there was just debris lying about on the surface of the water. 2 bodies were there, one disappeared under the waves, but they managed to pull midshipman Cotter out. Now he was just barely alive. What condition, you know, he was in, obviously didn't survive long once he was pulled from the water. And so his is the only grave we have, the only marker for HMS Pheasant at all in Orkney, and it's in Linus Naval Cemetery. And descendants of these men still go to that grave. You'll see things left there because that's all they have to memorialise this tragedy. Anyway, the book goes into loads of details about more aspects of the history of Britain at the time and the way the Navy was set up. But this talk is mainly about some of these men. And it's the ones I have images of, because obviously getting hold of images is really difficult. So Reginald Cotter, educated at Holt School, which is quite of an advanced school. It went into a lot of things like technical drawing. It saw the importance of engineering and physical activity. His father was a boat builder in Liverpool, and you see he was called up from the Royal Naval Reserves because he was already serving aboard ships that went across the Atlantic for the Merchant Navy. He was involved obviously in the Dardanelles campaign. You'll find that most of the men on this vessel were experienced, really experienced, and they'd been in a lot of battle zones. and in Egypt, where he worked on motor lighters, he would be in charge of those. So those little vessels. So although we think of the Royal Navy with the massive battle cruisers and destroyers and things, there are a lot of little vessels that support all of those. But when he was out in Egypt, he got measles and was extremely ill, and then malaria. So he was hospitalised home via the hospital ship Euralia, and spent time recuperating, getting better, and then declared fit on the 27th of September, and then posted to HMS Pheasant. This was the guy in charge of the vessel at the time of the sinking. So Lieutenant Griffiths, Douglas as he was known to his family, and this portrait was sent to me by family members. So his father was a reverend in Glasbury. His father was born in Australia and his mother in India, and that's another thread you see weaving through the backgrounds of a lot of these men is the empire that Britain had then, and a lot of family are born out with the British Isles, if you like. So extremely experienced. You'll see he's gone through all the officers' training and everything like that. And at the Battle of Jutland, and a lot of these men were at Jutland, he was on the destroyer Lapwing, which he was put in command of after the battle. So although he was on it during the battle, didn't assume command of it till after the battle. And then after Jutland, he's at Rora Head, where there was other encounters with submarine attacks on naval vessels, and he took part in action there. Married man with one son. After his death, his wife remarried. Some of the women who were widowed did that, not all of them, but I mean it was for women at that time, if it's a financially precarious situation when the main breadwinner dies and you've got family. So even for somebody of their class. So she married again, and the son by that second marriage actually also joined the Royal Navy, and he was killed in the Second World War. This is Engineer Lieutenant Commander Henry Symes. Another picture given to me by family, allowed to use by family. And obviously his whole background was in the engineering side of it. But when he was at the college in Keam, he saved his pal. They were out rowing, and they fell into the capsized, fell into the water, and his pal was going to drown, and he saved him. He was about 17 at the time or something. And so he got the Royal Humane Society certificate. So another thread that runs through, there's a lot of these guys were really quite brave in other ways that you find throughout their lives. So yeah, he an extremely experienced, and you'll see he was on the scout cruiser Foresight for a long time, and those patrolled the home in the Mediterranean seas. The Royal Navy and this war was very much a global conflict, and that is also, you'll see that throughout this, these men are involved in campaigns throughout the world, because Britain had this massive empire at the time, and it had refueling posts all around the world, and it was protecting its interests as well. So this gunner here, his parents were born in Ireland. So another thread running through all this is there are quite a lot of Irish guys on this vessel, or of Irish descent. So a lot of them served in the Royal Navy. So he was in the Dardanelles campaign and the Battle of Jutland on Dublin, which was hit both in the Dardanelles, and that'll come out because another chap that's on here, his brother was killed there, and Dublin was also hit. So these people have seen it all, basically. They're not like unseasoned naval officers. Petty Officer James Alexander Aitchison, Irish. Interesting about him is he was Navy through and through, so joined up as a boy rating, as many of them did. Won the Chief Folk Cup, I think that's how you say it. That's like the Navy loved those competitions where people rowed and competed against other vessels and things like that. And his team that he was in charge of won it so many times he got to keep the cup. So he was a leading member of the Orange Order, which, if nobody knows, a Protestant organisation, which was really powerful then, and particularly so because Ireland was in civil unrest that had the 1916 uprising. But he's a leading member of the Orange Order, and that when he died, there were huge tributes to him in the Belfast newspapers at the time because of that link. So he was in the Dardanelles and commended for his conduct. Now, Monitor 30, it's a little vessel again, another one of these little ones. It was hit by artillery fire from Turkish emplacements on the shore, and he stayed on board that vessel until everybody else could be rescued. And there was about 3 or 4 of them killed on that, but he stayed on board, volunteered to do that so that others could be rescued. Now, Signalman Davies, farming for generations in his valley in Wales, a draper. Now, what's interesting about him as well is he was the Royal Naval Division, which was kind of like the soldiers of the Navy, or if you like to think of them that way. And they they were served on the Western Front, they went ashore and served in Gallipoli. They had an extremely high casualty rate. So he was called up from the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserves, and what happened, you'll see he was transferred in 1916. As the war went on, men were moved about and transferred about to fill up gaps, because as you can imagine, casualties were mounting and they moved men about as need be. So taken from his farm in Tregarin, a draper, and then into the R&D and the Navy. This is Chief Stoker William Bowen, and his grandson wrote to me and sent me all these pictures. And I was really desperate to get the book out because his grandson is in his 90s, you know. So again, a Navy man through and through. And what's happened with him, the Amphion was the first sinking in the First World War. And it was absolutely awful. I mean, there was huge casualties, right? As with all these vessels. It struck a mine. It had gone out and done its work. It had captured Germans that had abandoned ship and were in the water, so it had Germans on board as well. And it struck a mine sort of on its way back that same submarine had laid and everything like that. It was just an absolute awful situation. And he survived that. However, there was also a William Bowen, a chief stoker on the Amphion that was killed. And when I was doing the research, this is where research becomes really tricky. It's difficult not to go down the wrong route because that William Bowen was also married to an Alice. But this William Bowen survived, well, at least for that part. And then there's his wedding photo, and of course that's the one we've used on the front of the book, because what's important about this story is it's the men and their families and their communities that are all affected by their deaths, not just, a single person. And his grandson sent me these. So you see, that's the telegram that people would have got when their loved one was killed. And on the other side is his will, because there was still prize money to be had, there was his pension, and because he'd been in the Navy for such a long time, that had fairly accumulated. And the Royal Navy was really good at itemising everything. Everything has, pound, shillings and pence is all there, right? But his widow had to wait, several years before getting some of that. It didn't just happen instantly he died. So that's another reason some women remarried quickly once their husband had died. But William Bowen's wife didn't, or widow I should say. Here's another member of the Royal Naval Division, so Charles Neal. Bradford, where he lived, was a big town for dyeing and cotton industry. And a lot of these industries these men had worked in previous to going in the Royal Navy, they've gone, right? They've gone now. But of course, Britain was a massive industrial nation then. And you see, he was again transferred from the Royal Naval Division in 1916, filling up those spaces. Another thread that runs through this is the families, the members of families who were all killed in the war. So his brother Herbert died on the 10th of January 1916. So you think his parents lost one son and then another one just over a year later. Stoker Patrick Connolly, probably the oldest member of the vessel. He was a stoker before the war on merchant vessels. Wexford in Ireland was, during the civil uprising, was a hotbed for rebellion as well. He was on HMS London when it went to the Aid of Bulwark, when that exploded. He was at the Dardanelles campaign, and he was, when he was at home, quite a famous boxer. A lot of these men did have sporting connections, like football, boxing, things like that. If you like working class sports, if you like to put it that way. But you see, 860 men from County of Wexford killed in World War I. And that's an important thing because they were all volunteers, right? There was no conscription in Ireland because of the rebellion, and it was under military rule, basically. So every Irishman killed in World War I was a volunteer. This is Cyril Grable. His family were Navy, so his father worked in the naval dockyard, joined as a boy reading, as did his brothers. So there are families that did that. All of them went in. It was a tradition. They all went into the Navy. So you see, he's at the Battle of Jutland on Defender, which was a destroyer. His brother Frederick was at the Battle of Jutland, and his other brother Herbert also at Jutland, and he was seriously injured on HMS Dublin, which I mentioned before, with other people in. So what families gave in that war is quite, it's humbling. I love this picture of him. His family sent me that. Because when you see pictures of them in their uniform, you get one view of them. And then when you see them in their civvies, and, he's like smart, he's like Peaky Blinders there. When you see them like that, it's a different view you get of them with his pet dog. So he was engaged at the time of his death, and the baby was born afterwards, and the family split, right? So his wife, his fiancée, I should say, she brought the child up, her and her side of the family, and his side of the family didn't have anything to do with him. But since all of this, and I've got a Facebook page, those people have been finding each other, because the future generations really don't care about that he had a baby out of wedlock, right? They're not bothered about that. They just want to know one another and who they are, where they've come from. So his family are now sort of reconnecting. But yeah, I love that photo of him, because it's just totally different from him in his uniform. Harry Sultan, his grandparents had fled Eastern Europe because they were Jews, and the Russians were moving into what we now call Prussia, that sort of area, and had a pogrom out against Jews. So thousands of Jews came, fled to the UK, to ports like Hull and London. And his grandparents did that. A massive family. So his father was a tailor. That was another sort of occupation a lot of those that fled went into. Very skilled people. They had family, obviously, in Hull and in London. There was that whole Jewish connection all linked together. So another one joined as a boy reading, see, experienced. So he was at Battle of Jutland, and his brother Walter in the East Yorkshire Regiment, his sister, a nurse during World War I, but cousins killed. So that was a really close family, because for years afterwards, there are memorial notices in the local papers remembering him from the family and from the wider family. So not just the loss of that young man, but the whole community felt it. And so that picture there was sent to me by his family, and that's him and his pals listening to a gramophone record. That's his Battle of Jutland medal and the death penny that they all got, that the family got. So James Hope Hamilton, another Irishman. The Royal Navy was a career. If there was nothing where you lived, there was no employment, or it wasn't well paid, the Royal Navy was a career for you. That was, a bit of adventure as well, and promotion prospects up to a certain level, so you could increase your pay. So it was a possibility for people to get out of where they were. So he served again a lot of places, and at the Atlantic and the West Indies, we're patrolling. The Royal Navy was patrolling all up and down Halifax, coast of Canada, right down into the West Indies, right down into South America. And of course his brother also in the Royal Navy. And these are his, John Hamilton, another Irishman. So he's from Skibbereen in Cork. His family sent me that photo of the medals. They don't have a photo of him. Nobody in the family seems to have a photo of John Hamilton. Skibbereen was really badly affected by the Irish famine. and in consequence possibly of that, it was also quite active during the Irish Rebellion, which was ongoing at this time. So you see, joined as a boy rating again, a Battle of Jutland on the Defender, but as happened with many of these families in Ireland, two brothers emigrated to Australia, so that's part of this wider thing that this film is important for, that it goes out to those family members. And of course, poverty and illness, and his sister Pat died at the age of 8, so tragedy there at home. So Samuel Haworth from Blackburn, and he was a weaver in a cotton mill. Now, we've got to sort of remember that people didn't stay on at school till they were 17 and 18. You know, people left at 14-year-old or 15-year-old, and so he had been a weaver in a cotton mill, and the cotton mills were huge in this area, Blackburn, but joined as a boy rating. You know, a better opportunity than being obviously a weaver in a cotton factory. There again, his brother in the Coldstream Guards, 1st Battalion, killed on the 30th of June 1916 in Flanders Fields, as it became known, where that poem was written, and that's where he's buried, in that graveyard there. There were amazing notices in the local press about both him and his brother, because they were very well known locally. Harry Hollywood, his wife, it says a presser in a locks work. Now, Walsall was known as the Locks City because it was full of locks works and buckle making places, and so little metal making factories like that. Another thing that you don't think about, but it's all these industries joined up when we were industrial, and you see he experienced laying mines, looking out for mines. Tom Haworth, there were 5 sons in the Haworth family, and all joined up, all served either in the Royal Navy or the Army. Boy rating, but the 30th of May, so getting close to the start of World War I. And you see he again is at Jutland on the Defender. So some of these men had served together, right? Some of them had served together. Burnley Lads Club, these lads clubs were really important in these areas when they took young boys out to, football, they went on camping trips, all that kind of, a lot of sport, a lot of outdoor activities, taking them out of the city. And these are 3 of his brothers. One brother that survived the war is not mentioned there. So you've got Daniel, missing in action, body never recovered. Willie, killed on HMS Dublin. That's the one we mentioned before in the Dardanelles when it was hit. So he was killed in that action. And John Robert, known as Robert, spent most of the war as a POW in a German POW camp, captured very early on in the war. But that family, 5 sons and 3 lost. What grief did that family go through? It's not really imaginable for us, because it's just so horrendous, but not uncommon, unfortunately. This is Angus MacDonald from Dundee, and he'd worked in a jute factory. Of course, that's what Dundee was famous for then. But again, joined as a boy rating. Wouldn't you rather do that than work in a jute factory? Because it was awful work. He was picking the jute, right? So, and his mother worked in the jute factory and the rest of his family as well. But he's picking the stuff because he was quite young in it. So it'd be really, really unhealthy work as well. So he served on London when it was escorting troops across to Europe with the British Expeditionary Force right early on in the war, and then supporting Anzac forces landing in Anzac Cove in 1915. He also has, he was up on a charge for theft at one point, which now that would be really bad on board a ship, somebody you couldn't trust. So he served time for that. Stealing. William Porter, so again that picture was sent in by his family. A lot of these boys came from absolute poverty, and William Porter is one of them. What we must remember is then you were basically one pay packet away from the workhouse if your main wage earner died. Particularly if you were low-income people, if you were already on that borderline. If the father died, you were struggling. And that's what happened in the Porter family. His father died. His mother just couldn't manage, a big family. So she kept the girls, and she kept the youngest son, and the other boys all went to Dr. Bernardo's. And, you might think, oh, imagine doing that. But it gave them a home, it gave them a meal, it gave them shelter. And Dr. Bernardo's then had a deal with Watts Naval Training School. So Watts Naval Training School trained up the boys that would get from Dr. Bernardo's for a career in either the Merchant Navy or the Royal Navy. And it got paid £25 or something for each boy that brought in. So it was a bit of an earner for Dr. Bernardo's, but it was also an opportunity for these boys to get out of the abject poverty that their families were living in. So we can't look at it with how we think of today. We have to look back then and what things were like then. We can't judge it by today. So he's on HMS London when the Bulwark explodes as well, but he was wounded during the Dardanelles campaign. His brothers all joined up. So George joined Royal Navy. Frederick, that's him there, and that family that was sent in by a family. He lost the sight in one eye, and he still tried to get in. He lost the sight in one eye during his time at the Watts Naval Training College, so young. So he worked his way around the eye test, and eventually, on about the second or third go, he got into the army, right? So he just obviously learned the eye test off by heart or something. So he served in Salonika. Charles joined the Royal Navy, and then the younger brother, who the mother had taken care of, he joins the Royal Navy after the war because he was too young during the war, and he served till 1933, and then he was called up again as a reservist, and he goes missing in action, presumed dead on HMS Whirlwind in 1940. And the story of that family is well, it's not untypical of the time because poverty affected so many then, and the cost in lives in 2 world wars now in that picture of that family. So this is Percy Searle, again a boy rating. Now HMS Formidable, I've got something here that I'll read out when that got hit, because it was reported at the time in the Western Times, and so it was struck, torpedoed by German U-24, stalking the ships in the early hours of the morning. And it says, when it was hit, a lot of men jumped into the water after the disaster, clinging to a boat, but were unable to hold on and were lost. 3 boats are supposed to have got safely away. Last evening, another boatload of survivors were landed at Lyme Regis. 9 of the occupants of the boat were dead, and all of the others, about 40, were in a terribly exhausted condition, and the distressed sailors were taken to the houses of the inhabitants, where they received every care and attention. A number of men were badly injured and are being treated in the local hospital. And he was one of the tiny number of survivors of the sinking of that vessel when it came ashore at Lyme Regis. And his mother had to rush from their home to see him in hospital. And then, of course, he loses his life in HMS Pheasant. There was no thought about post-traumatic stress disorder then. You know, you were just back in. You know, after, if you were wounded, you were cared for, and then you were back in. So this is William Staubach Edwardsy. And now, as you get further down and you get to the ordinary seamen, you see the people that are not joining as boy ratings necessarily, but are conscripted in. So these are, you know, you'll get, as we go through it, the lower ranks, if you like, are the ones that are brought in because of the war. But still experience, he's a fisherman. He was brought up by his grandfather, who was a key master. And you see, although he'd not been in the Navy long, really, if you think about it, 20th of December 1915, he's already been at the Battle of Jutland on the Warspite, which was hit 15 times with men killed, right? 14 killed and 16 wounded. Arthur Fisher worked in a hosiery factory, which was a big thing in Leicester, another one of the big factories there, lots of them there, making stockings and socks and things like that. Called up 2nd of February 1916. So hadn't really got much experience at all. These 2 guys were coal miners or worked in the mining industry. Their families had moved to Mountain Ash, where a new big massive coal mine had opened up. So their families had moved there and they were all employed in the mines, and they even took in lodgers as well to supplement that income. They joined up together. It's likely that Tom Weaver, this one here, lied about his age so he could join up with his pal. When they got time off, they spent it all together. They served on every ship they served on together. And of course, unfortunately, they died together. So that was a tragedy. That whole village, when these guys died and other men died, coal mining, the villages were very strong communities. And you can see that in the memorials to these men in those locations. Michael McLaughlin, another Irishman, a sawyer's assistant, he sawed wood. Again, low income. Limerick in Ireland, bonny place, but you know, what are your prospects there? And boy rating in 13th of August 1915. So maybe just inspired by adventure or whatever, but he joined up then. So that's basically it. It's taken a few years to get all this together and to get the book and everything, and Martin Lear's done a brilliant job laying it out for me. But it couldn't have been done without help from lots of other people local history groups and the families, the descendants of these men, giving me the information, because they're more than just, I wanted to write something that was more than just the name and the service number. You know, I wanted to fill them out a bit so that people would understand the loss to their own, like, immediate family, but the communities as well that they lived in, because every part of Britain and Ireland was affected by this war. Every community has a memorial, you know, yourself in Orkney, to the men lost, and some women, but mostly men, the men lost during that conflict. So there was no memorial to these men, and I just felt that was wrong, and I wanted to remember them in some way, and that's what this book is about, really. But thank you for coming, and as I say, this will be up on YouTube. That's it. Now, if there's anybody has any questions, we do have a roving mic situation, or a roving mic with a roving mic. If anybody has any questions about it or anything at all, so long as it's not too technical about the military aspects, because I'm not a military historian, I'm interested in people, but obviously the military aspect comes into the book, but it's the people I was always interested in. So anybody wants to ask it? Yep.
Don't need the mic, but
all right.
I'll take it anyway. So do we know where the ship is?
It's off Rora Head.
Yeah.
It's in very deep water, as you would see from that.
Oh, yes.
It's protected because it's a war grave.
Right, yeah.
So you're not allowed to dive on it and things like that. I find it surprising that there's absolutely no remains been, you know, like nothing been found, nothing at all, but maybe just all bashed to bits or something, or maybe the trophy hunters have already taken it.
I mean, if bits were washed ashore, sometimes it's not always easy to see what the bits are. It's just bits of metal. But there's no buoy or anything marking it, or?
No, I don't think so. No. It is a forgotten one, because if you think, like, sadly for these men, it's a small vessel. And in that whole conflict, when you think of the large episodes that occurred, that, you know, what's this little one here?
Also, anything that washed ashore, the chances of it being, I don't need this either, the chance of them being found where Rora Head is incredibly, it's very high up, so you'd be up on the cliffs looking down, and it's almost out at the Old Man Ahoy, so it's a good hike out. And actually, if you're going to Old Man Ahoy, you actually have to divert to the left to actually go to it as well, because it's quite a little bit out. So there'd be very few folk there would be nobody beachcombing, and there'd be very few folk looking down. So anything that did come ashore would have washed away eventually.
The trawlers that went out to find out what happened when the explosion took place, they did pull things out of the water as well as the one body. The lieutenant's coat was pulled from the water. Goodness knows where that's gone. A life belt, bits of debris like that, but nothing much, nothing much at all.
So how did you first hear about the HMS Pheasant, and what was it that piqued your interest so much to the point where you wanted to tell these lads' stories?
Well, I got sent a press release when Orca and Kevin Heath and Sula Diving went out and did this scan of the seabed, and this was discovered. So I got sent a press release about that, and I started writing about it, and I thought that was it, and then because I write online for the Orkney News, it goes out to a much wider audience than just Orkney, and we were contacted by William Porter's, a descendant of his anyway, and he sent the stuff about William Porter, and he was coming to Orkney. Martin Laird and I went out with him to Linus to Reginald Cotter's grave and took him to that, took him around that area. And then you get the backstory, and that's what really interests me when I find out about the people. So it was the same when I wrote about HMS Opal and William Sissons, the sole survivor of that. When a family member, a descendant, sent me his story of survival and what he then did in World War II as well, that got me interested in that side of things. So it's always the people when I get interested in them. And then of course Brian Budge sent me all the service records, and I'd started delving into those and looking further into the backgrounds of more of them. And I just got interested. I found some of the pictures of them, and I contacted local history groups and local libraries all across the place, and it just became really, I sent letters all over the place, Ireland, and to newspapers there to try and find more about the Irish chaps. And that's why it took years to pull all that together. That's it. Well, thank you for coming. It was brilliant.